Hey friends, Matt McQueenie Mix Minus Podcast, Saturday, the 1st of October, 2016. Can you believe this is the final quarter of 2016? Of course, in business and the corporate world, everything is broken down into quarters. And since we have a clean 12 months to the year, you have 3-month intervals that mark the quarters. And October 1st is the beginning of the fourth quarter. Well, at the very final day of the last quarter of 2016, which was the third quarter, I saw some really sad news. I saw it, as most things are today, I saw it on Facebook. And I started to kind of see some posts from a group of friends that had to do with around my late teens, early 20s period. Late high school and college years, and those were the years when I was in a lot of bands, punk rock, hardcore, emo, that whole scene. And I was seeing these posts about R.I.P., rest in peace. And it ended up being that the singer of the most recent band I was in, recent of course is a relative term because recent meant about 2005, the last show I ever played, actually. The singer of that band, I guess, passed away at 31 years old. He had just turned 31 back on June 13th, I believe. And it's one of those deals where you're seeing it come across Facebook. I saw a handful of posts. I saw some posts first, which were kind of fishy to me because it was like, why are these pictures going up now? It didn't make a lot of sense. This guy did not get very active on social media anymore. And then ultimately I saw somebody, it was like a weird crossover because when I was in a band in my late teens and then early 20s, the drummer from that band who went on to be in a lot of bands, including the drummer for Boy Sets Fire at one point in time, I saw him say R.I.P. about this gentleman. And I was in shock. Fridays tend to be the day of the week where you're kind of settling in, you know, nothing can get you. You got your 2-day weekend coming up. You're usually not that surprised by work because the world kind of starts to shut down as Friday moves itself through. And then I saw that and I was just stunned. I was sitting at work and I saw it and I went to the guy's page and I could see all of the condolences flooding through. He was the singer of the band I was in. The band was called Stillhaven. It was a screamo band, which is kind of a merging of hardcore music with the screaming, and then emo music, which is very kind of light and doesn't have screaming. It's very kind of nerdy, soft rock, but it has a lot of emotion in it, hence emo, and it has a lot of the cadences of heavy music, but played with a almost major, soft, nice singing, almost wimpy singing. And so when the two merged, and this was very hot around that time in the early 2000s, they merged these two styles and it almost became a caricature of itself in many ways. But this band did it well. They had a nice mix of the two styles, but it wasn't jarring. It was like both styles were seamless together and they would come in and out of each other and the screaming would go over pop and then the heavy music would have nice singing, and it was a good band. And I can kind of get into how I joined them, but he was the singer of that. He was a nice kid, very nice kid, but he always seemed very sad to me. It was like he was bursting at the seams to want to do something with his life, to be someone, to have accolades, to be known. And I don't think he ever quite got there. And the tough thing for me with that band was, one, from a personality point of view, it was one of the biggest challenges musically for me to play in. All of the members were very hard-headed about finishing songs, and they had a very high threshold for finishing songs. And so often you would go months and months and months and not have any songs. And that is one of the hardest things to do when you're in a band. Sometimes, just as when you do podcasts, just as when you write, just as when you create anything, you need to just do it. publish it, post it. If it's meant to survive, you can go back, you can do some editing, but it's always good to be putting things out into the world that have a certain level of quality. I mean, you don't want to put junk out there, but this band was tough because it was like running into a wall. I had been in bands in the past, and maybe this was my own frame of reference issue, but I had been in bands in the past where I was kind of the master of universe of the band. I would write everybody's parts. I would kind of drive which angle the song went towards and how the bridges would be put together and how one part would flow to the next. I would sort of tell people what to do, and that's not healthy either. Ultimately, that band, which also merged into another one, people did get more individuality in their playing, and maybe in a way I kind of helped train them to have faith in their own individuality in playing and have faith in that they are good enough. They were very good technically at playing, but that's sort of a good part of music, but you can be kind of a stand-in touring musician if you could play something, but taking it to that next level where you can create and truly make music that is special and is unique, novel. It's hard to do still today. There's so many people who were in bands back then and still continue to play in bands. There's only so many frets on that board. There's only so many chord progressions you can play. I often think it's funny how Blink-182 has had hit after hit and continues to come out with albums 20 years plus where they're playing the same chord progression in the majority of the songs. Now that is not to be looked down upon. It's actually something that's amazing. They're able to find something new in that same template year after year, and they're able to find a way to, change the angle 10%, 20%, flip the chord progression and still be fresh with it and still enjoy it. That is something that I never could get over. I always I would kind of run into my own wall when I would just want to make parts that were harder and harder, and harder is not always better. Sometimes when you could take the most simplest of phrases or the simplest riff and you could take that and make it sound like something new, that to me is genius. But this band I was in was so hard. We'd come for practice, I think twice a week. We'd play a show probably a couple times a month, and we would just get nothing done. We would play the songs they had, and then we would try to make new songs. And I was always writing parts in my spare time, trying to bring them to the group. And that was such a letdown when you'd bring a riff and it would kind of fall on deaf ears. People would say, I don't know. And then you have that feeling when you're jamming that it's not going somewhere, but people just keep jamming. And then people kind of subconsciously want to stop, but they also don't want to stop because that's almost giving up. Bands are funny that way. They're a lot like marriage, but they're marriage with a handful of people, and they're all men. So they're all hard-headed. They don't really tell you what they're feeling. And you just end up holding everything in. But yeah, that was the difficulty with this band. But I will say they had a following, and that was really cool. It was great to come into a band that had a following. I was the new addition because the guitarists, they were a younger group of guys. They were about 4 years younger than I was. And at least this guy was the singer, and then the guitarist who I replaced went to college, I think in Hawaii. And so they needed a new guitarist, and somebody who I went to grade school with was friends with this band and had recommended me. And I was able to slot in. It was interesting to learn another band's songs and learn the parts and kind of figure that out. One of the really neat things with that band was I had to learn to finger pick because they had one almost Simon and Garfunkel soft song in a way. Yeah, not Simon and Garfunkel, but that kind of feel with the finger picking. And that was a real challenge to get through. That taught me a lot about myself, being able to learn new ways of playing that I never had thought I would want to play. And kind of slotting in with that band and playing was really nice. It was great to play shows. I can remember that there was one, maybe it was going into 2005? Must have been. It was New Year's Eve 2004. So it was going into 2005, I think. And it was a basement show, and it was at this guy Randy's house. This guy was the king of the scene at the time, and he lived in Elmwood Park, up off Route 4. A part of Route 4 you never really get to. It's where it cuts off to the left and goes towards like Patterson. And there's Elmwood Park there, hinted off the side on the right on Route 4. And he had these basement shows, and one of those was New Year's Eve. And I'll never forget it. That was the moment I had, just like when I got to work for the New Jersey Nets and I got to be on that team plane and travel with the team and stay at the hotel. I never forgot that. I took a snapshot of that moment and said, if I never get to do this again, I did it. It was my bucket list kind of item. And I did not get to do it again. I kind of ended my run with the Nets after doing that for a year, but I never forgot how special that felt. Just as I never forgot this one night, this New Year's Eve, where we played this show, and we might have played right into New Year's, but it was this basement. It wasn't, there's no way it was safe, but it was amazing. A lot of times these punk shows, these hardcore shows that are held in basements, they can't be any less safe. And you're also wondering how the neighbors feel about it once you become an adult. It always shocks you that somehow these things go off and they're so loud. Now, New Year's Eve is different, but some of these shows, I used to go to a place in Westwood, New Jersey, where great bands would come through, big bands in this scene, national bands, who would be going from playing New York City and Boston, and then they would stop off on a Friday night and play this little garage, and it was the most special feeling. I love that feeling of exclusivity and being in a club and getting to see the highest levels of that art, that music, and you get to see it in a small environment. It is just amazing. I just heard Howard Stern actually saying this same thing, how cool it was that Metallica was in their studio, in essence playing for them, playing for those 5 people who were in the studio. Granted, the other 4 or 5 million of us who were listening on the other side were there too, but the exclusivity of seeing them in your studio is just amazing. And that's how I felt with this. But this basement show on that New Year's Eve, it was one of the most amazing musical nights of my life. I just remember we started playing these songs, and they had good songs. They came out with this 3-song demo, which I was not a part of. I did write 2 songs after that demo with the band, and these songs never came out other than just like a really, really kind of beta demo where we did it in somebody's basement, real equipment, real sound engineering stuff. And actually, interestingly enough, this singer who passed away ended up going to Full Sail in Orlando, which is an audio engineering school. So these guys did know what they were doing and understood kind of the groundwork, but we made a little demo there, and I love those songs. It was a nice soft song. And then there was one of the coolest metal hardcore songs that I've ever written. Oh my God. Well, at least for my tastes, I loved it. I felt Madball in there. I felt Thrice. I felt metal. I felt some of the heaviest breakdown double bass stuff ever. Oh, it was so good. I got to try to get my hands back on that song. I can't figure out where it is. It's probably on some old laptop I got, but you can only play it through like a real player. It doesn't even have an MP3. I got to get my hands on that. But we were in this basement show on this New Year's Eve at this kingpin of the scene's house. And there was, I mean, God, I'm going to say there was 200 people in that basement. There weren't. There were probably like 50, but it doesn't matter how many people there are. It matters how filled and how enthusiastic and how intense that crowd is. Now, who would think that 6 years later I'd be getting married on New Year's Eve, and that would be another time where I'd have a great moment. But there's something about New Year's Eve that just people know this is it. They're going for broke on the year. They're going for broke on the night. Everybody's off the next day. We all understand. It's like a team playing for a championship. We're all in. And I felt that with my wedding, and I felt that with this night. When you know it's New Year's Eve, you drink a little more, you carry on a little more, you carouse a little more. You're just your best self. And you know that you're going to be able to reset the clock the next day, clear the canvas, wipe away that blackboard. And even though we all end up who we are, we always are who we are. You know, I always think it's funny when people say, let me, I'll do that. You know, you're in college. I'll do that thing in a month. I'll do that big paper in a month. And we always think that we're going to be a different person in a month. We always think, oh, the us in a month is going to be more responsible. The us in a month is going to be someone who follows through and does all the research. But it's like a credit card of your own time. You're putting down, you're using the time up now. You're going to have to pay later. You're still going to be the same person in a month. You got to remember that you are you. You're pretty much you in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, 20 years. The essence of you is you. There's some things you can pick up. There's some skills you can attain. There's knowledge you can attain. But that motivational feeling inside you, that procrastination, those kind of personality traits really don't leave. They're hard to do. That stuff is natured and nurtured into you. You can't push it. And then, you kind of get to a point where do it now. Do it today. I often run into this with podcasts. I say, I'll do it on Sunday. because I got to do all this stuff on Saturday. And then sometimes you just got to go, no, I'll do it right now. I set this thing up in my office. I have a nice studio downstairs, but I set it up in my office because I have some new gear I want to play with. But you just got to do it. You got to press play and move forward. But it's that feeling, that New Year's Eve feeling. We think we'll be different tomorrow. We think we'll be different because the year changes from 2004 to 2005. It's the same reason gyms are swollen at the beginning of the year, because they give away deals to get you into the gym, to get you locked in for a year. They understand how New Year's resolutions work. We all say, this is going to be the new me in the new year. And so gyms are swollen at the gills for the first 2 weeks of that year, and then they empty out again. It's one of the sad things when you're someone who goes to the gym all the time to watch. You always dread that beginning of the year because you had your you had the lay of the land. You had the ability to do whatever you wanted to do at the gym. You understood when you go, that your process and your routine were not going to be upended. But then when you get to that first couple of weeks of the new year, it is like everybody's there. You can't get pieces of equipment. You can't get the bench. You can't get the cardio machine. And it's just really tough, but it does wipe away. And you got to know that. You understand the cycles. You understand you'll still be the same person in 2 weeks who will still be coming. But that feeling on that New Year's Eve when people are just wiping it all clean, giving everything they have of themselves. And I just remember we started playing and all the emotion was drowning out in that place. People were singing our songs word for word. I was getting the chills. There was a moment there where I was so overcome that I actually became a different person for a moment. I was so overwhelmed with just endorphins and good feelings, and just these chills just made me a different person. It changed my skin. It changed my being. And I was playing so hard that I jumped. I slipped on beer, I think. I fell on the ground. People are stampeding on me, and I didn't care, and nothing could hurt me. I had armor. It was the armor of goose skin. People are stepping on me, and they're not meaning to step on me. They're just overwhelmed by the moment too. And I remember the pickups on my guitar got kicked in and actually they had to be repaired, but I still played. And I was just, something was playing for me. It was like the enthusiasm of the moment. I was just on autopilot, but I was just so in this moment thinking, never forget this. And I remember I had a picture. Someone took a picture of it, and I don't even know where that picture went. At that time, it probably went on MySpace, and I go on MySpace now, and it's like, what a weird dead land MySpace is. Like, who even owns it anymore? It has no recollection of your history on it. Somehow you still have a profile, but I don't even know what's there. I don't even know what my logins are. But that was Facebook at the time. That was how you interacted with people. That was, as a band, how you disseminated information. That was how you talked with people, how you tried to meet girls, how you tried to talk with your friends and interact and share. That was the harbinger of Facebook. That was what started it. Facebook obviously took it over, but I was just, I was so in this moment, and I was just so happy and grateful on a New Year's Eve there that I could have that moment. And when I think back to this singer who passed away, I came to this band. I had no connection with these kids. The other guitarist was actually a year older than me, but the rest of the guys were younger, whether it was 2 years, 3 years. And I had no common ground with them other than the music. And they lived a little different than I did. They drank really hard. There was drugs. And that was my initial fear with this one was it the drugs? Because you're just seeing it happen all over the place. Whether you're talking about heroin, whatever I feel like you're always talking about heroin. I don't even know what the other drugs out there. There are these designer drugs, these pharmaceutical created drugs where people lace marijuana with something or do this or have ketamine. You remember on the night of that show on HBO and the kid had all this crazy stuff. People are taking things that are changing their constitutions, and that with the wrong dose on the wrong night, your life could be extinguished. You're gone. As a young person, it's one of the scariest and saddest things I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of that. I'm not saying this is what happened with this guy, but that was my initial fear. And when somebody dies young, that fear is often realized. And what I always thought with him was when he was on the stage, he was a showman. He was a mini Mick Jagger. he was just this 100 pounds and nothing, 5 foot nothing. I mean, it wasn't that short, but he was a lean stick. He never looked that ultimately healthy. He was an enthusiastic singer. Was he a great singer? I don't know. But he could sing pretty well. He could scream really well, and he gave himself to the music, and he loved being a front man. He had emotion. That overwhelming feeling I had on that New Year's Eve, he had every time he stepped on the stage, every time he succumbed to music, every time he gave himself to it, the music gave it back to him. And he was just, he was unbelievable. I was just watching a YouTube video. Someone took a video when we played at this military installment somewhere in South Jersey named Browns Mills. It's like where a lot of military people live. And it almost felt like one of these Stephen King shows or like Stranger Things, where it's just this weird environment of people who live there and come together at this little Elks Lodge or something we played at, and they were really into it. But I remember I was just watching that show. It's really, really fun to watch, and he just gave himself to it. And I don't know if he gave himself to it extra because there were drugs, because there was drinking. I was always torn between that when I was a musician. First of all, I came up in high school as a straight edge kid, which means I didn't drink, I didn't do drugs. I drank a lot of coffee. Maybe that's a drug, I don't know. But there was a sanctity to playing a show to me where I didn't want to be affected or clouded by drinking or doing drugs. And I've never done drugs recreationally. I have said if marijuana is legalized, I'll probably get into that game, as I have coffee and craft beer and wine and all that. I'd like to get into whiskey at some point, but I just haven't had the taste for it or the time to try to acquire that taste. But I was always worried playing music. If my end goal was to try to be a touring musician, I didn't want to go there where I needed to drink, or not, I don't even want to say needed to drink, but I didn't want to drink because I didn't want to cloud that show. I always thought I'll have a drink or two after to celebrate, but I didn't want to be clouded in the moment. I wanted to feel every part of it, the nerves. I wanted to feel my ability to play. I didn't want to cloud that feeling. I didn't want to cloud my nerves. I wanted to be in it. It's like playing sports. I wouldn't drink while playing sports. I know a lot of people might play softball and drink, but I just wanted to be in that moment, and I could have a drink after. But even to that point, I would always think in my head, because this is how my head works, boy, if I'm a touring musician at some point and I'm playing 5 or 6 nights a week, I don't want to be drinking after every show as well. I'm a weekend drinker. I'm a recreational weekend drinker. And so I just never wanted to be clouded by that. Now, when you're just playing a couple of times a month, weekends, drinking's fine because that's when you would drink anyway. But I saw that with him, the way he was able to give it to it. I was always worried that was what he was doing that got him there. Sometimes when someone looks too ecstatic and endorphin laced, they are. Laced is the word. But he was great. I mean, he was a nice kid. Again, just 100 pounds soaking wet, basically. A nice kid, but this group of guys, I really liked them. And this isn't meant to say I didn't like them. They were just so different than my sensibilities. I had gone on to a regional Catholic high school, even though I was years older than them. So I got more of an open feel to the whole county. I had to get to know kids in a college kind of way early on. And I saw these kids who went to the one high school in town. They came up through the schools and ultimately went to the high school in town. And I just saw a very closed aspect to that. They never got out and saw anything. And there was a lot of sadness in this town. My brother, Mike, lost 2 of his best friends growing up. It was the 4 of them. So it was him and then 3 best friends. There's only 1 left. One died of a heroin overdose during the night. The other one shot himself in the head. And I think there was a lot of discussion that he shot himself because he had gotten an addiction to pharmacological opioids. And then they were taken away. And when those are taken away, you're like the Walking Dead. You need it. You need it to get through the pain that's created by how much you're taking. And when that tolerance is given, you're a crying baby. And I guess he took his life. My brother Tom, who's only 22 years old as of like a couple weeks ago, he just lost his best friend from growing up. I think the kid was 23 and he had a girlfriend and he had a baby on the way. I just can't stand life extinguished early. I mean, this isn't connected, but the Jose Fernandez passing. That was one of the saddest things to me. A 24-year-old kid who survived the trek from Cuba on water, had a couple of failed attempts, ultimately made it. I think he was 16 years old. When he was on the trip that made it, somebody went overboard and he jumped overboard into the ocean to save that person, and it ended up being his mom. So the same person who lives by the boat dies by the boat. He's out late at night, in the middle of the night, going to a place. I saw the picture where, he's partying at this place on the water in Miami, and then he takes a picture with a fan or somebody or a friend, and you see that picture and it's up like 20 minutes before they probably hit that jetty and died on impact. And I just think of this 24-year-old kid who's lost probably $300 million in earning power and will never see what he could have become. Potential Hall of Famer. And I just hate the wasted youth. I mean, even when Arnold Palmer died, guy's 87. That's a life lived. That's a guy who's potentially understanding where he is in life. Young people dying is like just one of the saddest things. I think back to this band, and it was always a tug of war and a give and take between my tolerance of being in it because I enjoyed the music, I enjoyed being in a band, I enjoyed being challenged by playing with new people. That's always a good thing. It's like that pickup basketball feeling when you go and play and you're a little nervous playing with new people, and sometimes those new people all know each other's games and they play. But then when you're hitting your shots and you're playing hard, that esprit de corps is gained immediately. I mean, within 3 winning games, you are like best friends. You're high-fiving. They all know your name. They know your spot on the floor to hit. And that's something that's great. That's a great thing about new experiences and integrating with new people. Because I'm more of a loner. And I'm not a loner because I can't have friends. I'm a chosen loner. I just enjoy my free time. I'm more introverted, which is funny saying that because I do this, but this is the most I talk all week. But I'm more of an introvert. I enjoy reading, consuming, observing, tying content together, watching, and then trying to just find my way in this world. It's very hard to figure out how to find your way in the world. You think there's a common knowledge with other people, and a lot of times you find out, especially in these political times, you go, whoa, what did that person just say on Facebook? Oh my God, is that what was in their heart the whole time? Are they having a bad day? Are they having a bad year? Are they having a midlife crisis at 34? What on earth? Where did they learn this? They were so different in high school, and at that point they should have been someone else. Where were these influences that, was it their parents, and was it latent until now? What on earth? Oh, I mean, that's a different thought, but I just remember that tug of war being in this band. You had that positive of playing when there was sober feeling to it. And I can remember one time we had a show, I think in Pennsylvania, and this is always one of the parts of being in a band that's actually not that cool. When you have a show, you would think that's the greatest apotheosis of being in a band. I actually thought practicing was the best part, because you got the positive of almost playing live. You just turned inward anyway. You don't care about the crowd at that point. You got the positive playing live, and you didn't have to move equipment. Being in a band and playing elsewhere, you have to have somebody who has the minivan, or their parents have the minivan. You got to carry stack amplifiers, which have the heavy heads, and then the really heavy cabinets. All the instruments, the drums, and then you got to break them apart, and everyone becomes a moving company. You move them to the minivan, to the mom's minivan, and then you go to a Elks Hall or an American Legion or one of these places. They're all the same. And then you have to unload the van, and you got to put it in a corner somewhere, and then you got to play, and you got to put it all together real quick. And by that point, you're almost exhausted from all the lifting you've done. So by the time you're playing, you're you got to muster up and manufacture some enthusiasm, because you're just worn down physically. That's always one of the overrated parts of being in a band. Playing live elsewhere. Ugh. It's better to be a house band where you have shows where your stuff is. That Westwood Garage I talk about, there was a band who owned that. The band who owned that house And they were high school kids at the time. So it was really their parents' house, but that was their practice space, was that garage. So their stuff was always there. They never even played shows elsewhere, really. They just played at this garage, and they would end up opening for bands like Good Riddance or AFI because it was their garage. And so they never needed to go somewhere. I always thought that was the best thing if you weren't going to try to be an enormous band, to just be in that situation where you're playing, you're the house band, you're playing where your stuff is. But I remember on this show, we were going to play in Philadelphia. We were going to play in Pennsylvania somewhere, which means you had to start your day really early. That's another thing. It's almost like tailgating to a football game. And I went to the house of the kid who recommended me to the band. So this guy, this is one of the sad things. This guy, my age, he grew up kind of poor within this rich town. I don't think his dad was around. His mom was somewhat absentee, but she was around. And I felt like he was never nurtured. He was like the kind of kid who was having sex with women when he was in 5th grade. And he was having conquests, like tons of it. And then you're sitting there going, was he lying? Was he making it up to make himself appear bigger? And even if he wasn't making it up, that's like a sad thing for the rest of his life, because he's done these things when you're at a point where you can't even appreciate what they mean. And then by the time you reach the point where you can appreciate them, it's like nothing. It's like watching pornography when you're 10 years old. By the time you're 25, what the hell is going to get you off then? There's a time and a place for everything. I always thought that was what was great about being straight edge, was that I didn't come to drinking until I was almost 20, basically. I mean, I did drink on this cross-country trip I did right after high school, but it was like a little bit. It was getting a taste. And then I sort of sparsely did it for many years after that. And it wasn't probably till I was in my mid-20s where I started to kind of appreciate alcohol a little more. And as I kind of said earlier, I go towards craft beer. I enjoy wines. I like the craft of it as much as anything. I'm not getting Coors Lights and pounding them at home, or Miller Lights. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I appreciate it. And I think coming to it later the way I did, and understanding the gravity of alcohol the way I did by being straight edge, kind of allowed me to not overdo it. And I think that was a nice aspect. If I started drinking when I was like 13, who knows where I'd be when you're older. You've now nurtured alcohol into a major growing time. Where do you come out on the other end from that? I don't know. But this guy, it was a sad thing, and I always appreciated that he introduced me to this band. But there was also a sad moment where he almost wanted to be the Tommy Mottola of the band, and he would say like, I'm the backbone of this band and all this, and we said, no, you're not, man. We appreciate what you're doing for us, but what are you offering? What are you pushing? You're not even part of this scene, really. You can help us carry stuff, but you got to have your own life. You can't hook into this band. You don't play anything. And there's that sad moment. It would almost in a movie be the point where he becomes murderous and has a rage-filled outburst where he tries to take everyone down. And actually, what I'm about to say, maybe there was something subconscious to that. But I remember on that day, that day we were going to have that show later on in Pennsylvania somewhere. And I showed up at his house because that was kind of the house everybody went to after practices or to hang out, because there was no order there. There was no adults, and it was just this basement where people would hang out. And I remember people would go in there with malt liquor, 40 ounces, which is, malt, old English, whatever it is. That's fine. But I remember going in there in the morning, and a bunch of people had stayed there that night. And I felt like I was walking into a Walking Dead episode. I opened up the storm cellar, because that was how you got into the basement. And I walked down the stairs, and it was dark and it was cloudy. And everywhere I walked, there were bodies. And it hit me how sad it was that I had a morning where I got up at 7, I went to the gym, I had my coffee, I read. And all these people had probably done heroin, or the majority of them, and they were strung out. Nobody could get up. It was hard to figure it all out. And I said, man, what am I doing here? Is there a future here? This isn't me. Am I going to get pulled down by this? And it's that tug of war. And we got to deal with that, because a lot of people do this stuff. But you're torn inside morally on what the heck you do with that. I don't even know. But this guy passed at 31, and I was so saddened. I was so saddened because I had this small period of time. I was trying to do the math in my mind how long it was. I think it was about a year, maybe a year and a half. And we tried and we came together and we'd play shows and we made songs. And I saw them a lot. I'd see those 2 practices a week and I'd see those probably 3 shows a month. And, but it was always weird because that was it for me. I wasn't going to be friends with him or the guys doing the drugs or going, like, because they're going to go back and do stuff. And you could always tell people when they're doing drugs because they're kind of shady. They're very, they'd be kind of strung out. Their pupils would be dilated. Everything would be surreptitious and secret. And they'd kind of talk to you through obfuscation. They'd talk to you in a way that like kids talking to their parents when they're doing something bad. And that was just always something that stuck with me. And I always thought, man, if I went on tour with them, would I be able to live in that? And I know that's part of being a rock star and music and all that. Although emo music is not for rock stars. Emo music is for like novelists and creators. So I don't know. But one of the places we played was this place called Archer Hall in Allendale. And Archer Hall was some kind of like Presbyterian Methodist church. And they had this cool little banquet hall. And we played a show there. And someone else who played a show there was Alkaline Trio. Alkaline Trio became a very big kind of underground punk band. They would probably open for bigger bands. Like Blink-182 is the kind of the highest level of pop punk in a way. And I remember they would play there. And why am I bringing them up? Because I've gotten to thinking lately about Blink-182. And what does Blink-182 have to do with Alkaline Trio? Well, the lead singer and guitarist from Alkaline Trio is a guy named Matt Skiba. The Alkaline Trio was from the Chicago area, I believe. And in the last couple of years, Blink-182 has kind of had a festering dispute between its members, especially Tom DeLonge, the lead singer, who has gotten into aliens and he's gotten into wanting to be in the movie or be in a band like U2 and all this. And it's kind of broken up the band quite a bit. They had a hiatus for quite some time, and then they came back around 2010 or 11 and put out the great album Neighborhoods. Fantastic album. That song After Midnight is one of my favorite Blink-182 songs ever, but the whole album's really good, as was the one before it, the self-titled album. That was kind of where they broke through from being a straight-up pop-punk band to having these kind of more indie influences and the Cure influences and more staccato rhythm and all that. But ultimately, there was a real break, and they parted ways with Tom DeLonge. And Blink-182 just came out a couple months ago with the album California. Matt Skiba replaced Tom DeLonge, but you still have Mark Hoppus, Travis Barker, and I was a little skeptical of it because I didn't like that a 3-piece was going to be changing the configuration and chemistry of their band. It would be like Green Day changing out Mike Dirnt or Billy Joe Armstrong. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. When you're that small of a unit, you can't just change 33 1/3% of that band. It doesn't make sense. And interestingly enough, the California album is very good. It really is very good. You do miss that nasally kind of sweet and sour aspect of what Blink-182 had, where Tom was the nasal guy and Mark was the more sounding like a kid, like a high school kid who never broke puberty, but it's not nasal. It's just like earnest. I always felt like Mark Hoppus sounded earnest, but there was just the way they all played together was so beautiful. And they were around for so long that they matched me turning into an adult when you think about it. I remember when I was in like 8th grade, and that was when I started to really get into punk. Well, it was probably 7th grade. In 8th grade, I was in a band called the Mix-Ups, which is kind of funny. We played shows. We didn't even know how to play music. It was so funny. But we tried and we played hard, and we had amps the size of my computer, meaning they were very small. But I can remember in like 8th grade hearing the song Carousel, which is on their first album. And it's one of the most beautiful songs, and it teaches you so much that you'll need to learn if you're going to be someone who plays in pop punk. It teaches you bass chords. It teaches you how a single guitar can interact with a bass. It teaches you octaves. It teaches you harmonies. It teaches you really the 2 templates for how to sing in pop punk. As I said, the nasally Delange, and then the earnest sounding Hoppus. You hear that throughout all bands. Bands have tried to come and go. Well, they've tried to come and take on Blink-182 and be facsimiles, and they end up really being gone. But I think so much about Blink-182 when this came out, and then it just takes me back through my life. Much as this passing of this singer took me back to that period of time, I think of my maroon truck back in that time, and who the bands I was listening to, and the influences I had, and my aspirations, and the fact that I was out of college and I had no idea what I wanted to do, and my parents were nice enough to give me a quote-unquote gap year where I could play in bands and go to the gym and try to figure things out, ultimately working at a coffee shop, and then serendipitously ending up in my dad's company and finding a career. But I just remember, when you're 23 and you don't have something to do, you think it's over because you're seeing friends start to go into work, and it was like, oh, they knew what they wanted to do. They're pre-med, they're lawyers. I never knew what I wanted to do. I just wanted to create stuff. I just wanted to, and so when you look at Blink-182, it just takes me back through all of that kind of stuff where really, when I use Blink-182 as the frame of reference, they followed me through so much. They were like the first pop punk band I listened to, which started it all, because that was where it really started. And that gave me my identity through high school and into college, was music and playing in bands and being a really good guitarist, a lead guitarist. I was a wanted commodity in music. I was somebody who came to the table and people were impressed with. That was really cool. It was being like a self-made man in some ways, being like entrepreneurial, where you could join forces with others and then create stuff. That was what an amazing thing. But I remember being in high school and I would be, you'd cover Carousel all the time, cover song. I remember playing with my friend Ray and Joe Wilson, who was the singer of After the Fact and Welcome Home Travis. And now I think he's still a kind of a underground solo artist star with his acoustic guitar. I remember in college, taking a road trip with my friend Sean Fitzgibbons, my freshman year roommate, who had written a movie, and his movie was going to be playing at the Palm Springs Film Festival. And I decided to invite myself to drive cross country with him to that film festival. His dad worked in Sheridan's headquarters. And so going across the country, we were able to stay at any Sheridan we wanted for $20 a night. And so we just went Sheridan to Sheridan all over the country. We went everywhere. It was just such an amazing time. We just were all over the country. It was such a fun trip. And then I remember when we got to California and we were in LA and San Diego. But when we were coming back from San Diego, we stopped at Sombrero, which is in the song Josie. She buys me Mexican food from Sombrero. So that carries me into college. I remember finishing college and then driving cross country again, this time with my brother, because I was going to be moving to Phoenix, Arizona to live with my cousin and a friend of his who ended up actually being in the drug trade and scared the crap out of me. And I left in the cover of Night one time to get out of there. I've talked about that in previous podcasts, so you can hear that. But I remember driving out there and the feeling of openness, the open road, going west. This was going to be my life. I graduated college a semester early because of 9/11, and I just wanted to get out. And so I remember right after Christmas, my brother and I got into the car, my white Ford Explorer, 95 Ford Explorer Sport, and we drove across the country. And that was, the self-titled Blink-182 album was like the backdrop, as was the album from Story of the Year. I just remember listening to those two albums over and over. And Blink-182 was there. And there was I remember that song on that Blink-182 album where it had the piano, really the sad minor piano. And then it had the woman reading the letter. I think it was maybe Mark Hoppus's grandmother's letter to her betrothed, who was in the war or something. I just remember those feelings and they just infuse in you when you're thinking about starting this new chapter in your life. And that album, I could listen to it now and it just takes me back there to that trip with my brother. I remember when Blink-182, when they came back after their initial hiatus during the Neighborhoods album, my sister at this point, who's like 13 years younger than me, got really into Blink-182. And so all of a sudden I went to 2 concerts with my sister to go see Blink-182. They're with me all the time. And I remember going to these concerts and it was like this one period in time where my sister, who we really don't have a lot in common, I mean, 13 years difference is quite large, but we had this moment in time where we went to see Blink-182 at Madison Square Garden. I remember seeing them at that place in Camden on the waterfront there as well. And I just remember seeing her rock out. She was so pumped. She's someone who keeps to herself. She never plays her hand, but man, she was overcome by Blink-182. And I was too. I was so, it was so great. So Blink-182 just makes all these things flood back. I mean, I think of the one album they had, was it Enema of the State? And that was the first one, I think, with Travis Barker. And it takes me back to the late 90s and American Pie and going to see that movie. And just, oh man, you get those feelings when you're in high school. And it's such a nice time. I'm not saying now's not a nice time, but there's just something about that feeling of the weather getting nice, American Pie, Blink-182 playing, you get your car, you're blasting it. I just think of that first song, down, 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 down. She's a dove, she's a effing nightmare. Unmistakable was my mistake to stay here. Oh, it's so good. Blink-182 is a great band. They really are. But what always intrigued me, so Matt Skiba joins them in their newest incarnation. And the California album, again, it's good. But his influence, you can feel it because they almost have more of a, whereas before with Tom DeLonge, who had that U2 feel, they had more of an open feel in the guitars, little licks. Matt Skiba almost brings from my time, from when I was a teenager, the New Jersey punk scene. He almost brings the feelings of that into the new Blink. I think of Midtown, and I think of a band called Humble Beginnings, who both shared Gabe Saporta. He was in both of those bands, and actually he became Cobra Starship. So he became a big, kind of a big hit radio guy for a while. But it's got this staccato rhythm, and it's nice. It is a nice progression. I do keep wishing Tom would show up though, because this just feels like another band. But it is really good. But I think of Matt Skiba, the way he holds the fort. He's not Tom. Again, Tom brought Sweet and Sour. He brought Yin and Yang with him and Tom. The way they talked to each other on the stage was always weird. Tom was way out there. Mark was way out there. They were like teenage kids talking to each other. But with Matt Skiba, I never loved Alkaline Trio. I really didn't. They had a couple good songs I enjoyed, but I never loved them. I had friends who just swore by them. And I just, sometimes it's up to a band how they feel with you, and they never felt great to me. But I remember seeing them at the Allendale Church, as I said, that Archer Hall where I played one of our final shows with that band that I was in, Stillhaven. And I think of him playing in front of a handful of kids. And I think of how big Alkaline Trio did get, but not big like Blink-182. And I often wonder what it's like now to be playing arenas. From somebody who was in punk bands, playing like Irving Plazas of the world, concert halls, probably got into a very big or a medium-sized arena as an opener once. But when you're the prime event, what do you think inside? And I think about this with Chris Shiflett of the Foo Fighters too. He used to be in punk bands, and then he's elevated into the Foo Fighters, and now you're playing arenas of like 30,000 people. Like, oh my gosh, it's such an amazing thing. I often wonder what that's like. And do you have nerves, or is it just playing? I mean, it's very similar to a comedian. Comedians play in small halls, and then all of a sudden they're playing in performing arts centers, and then all of a sudden they're playing in Madison Square Garden. Is it easier? Is it harder with the large crowd? Is the small crowd more intimate, and maybe the intimacy is more nerve-wracking because you can look actually into someone's eyes right there? Or is the mass of people, the mob of people in an arena scarier because you feel the vastness of it? You feel 20,000 people looking at you and yelling. Or is it like a religious event where you just all give yourself to it? That is something that's always interesting to me. And I'd love to talk to someone once and ask them about that. Do they even notice it? The first time they do it, are they like shaking? Or you're a guitarist, it's what you do. You're a bassist, it's what you do. You're a drummer, it's what you do. Is it just normal? Does it become commonplace because it's still just you? It's like that movie Hoosiers. Hey guys, we're playing in this huge gym. The baskets are still 10 foot high. The court is still 90 feet. The free throw line is still as far as it is away. It's like in college when you get to the national championship game in basketball, and they're playing in like 80,000, or not 80,000. Well, Yeah, like the Dallas arena, those enormous arenas. I mean, there is a part of that where the vastness actually throws you off because you're trying to pinpoint it into a hoop with a glass backboard. But I'm so intrigued by that aspect. Matt Skiba playing Archer Hall in the late 90s, and he's playing every major sports arena in America and Europe and all over the world with Blink-182 now. You can't even hide behind a lot of people because it's all right there. You're three-person. You're a three-piece. You can't mess up. I mean, wow. I'm very intrigued by that. But we ended on Blink-182, but we started it on the passing of the singer of the band I was in. Do rest in peace, sir. You had sadness in your eyes I could always see, but you had enthusiasm in your being. You were overcome by the musical moment. I shared that musical moment with you. Whether I was able to share the moments outside of the music, not so much. But hey, if you can come together with someone in an exalted moment, that's pretty good. So guys, let's call it there. I'll talk to you soon. Matt McQueenie, Mix Minus Podcast.